A greedy family gathering for a will reading discovers their wealthy patriarch left everything to the undocumented housekeeper, who turns out to be their half-sister and the only one who truly cared for him. The silence in the mahogany-paneled library was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat as the lawyer's words echoed through the room. To my beloved daughter Esperanza, who has been my true companion in these final years, I leave my entire estate. The collective gasp from my relatives was nothing compared to the shock that rippled through me, because I was Esperanza, the undocumented housekeeper they'd all dismissed, and I had just inherited everything. 3 hours earlier, I pressed my face against the cool kitchen window, watching the parade of luxury cars pull into the circular driveway of the Whitmore estate. Each arrival brought another vulture dressed in designer black, their grief as manufactured as their sympathy. They'd come for the reading of Harrison Whitmore's will, these relatives who hadn't visited once during his final months when he'd called out for them in his delirium. My hands trembled as I arranged the silver tea service on the antique cart. 23 years I'd worked in this house, first as a desperate teenager who'd crossed the desert with nothing but hope, then as the only person who truly understood the lonely man who lived within these walls. Now they were all here, circling like sharks who'd caught the scent of blood in the water. Esperanza. The sharp voice of Vivian, Harrison's eldest daughter, cut through my thoughts. Make sure there's enough coffee. We don't want to be here any longer than necessary. I nodded silently, the way I always had. Let them think I was just the help. It had served me well all these years. What they didn't know was that Harrison had spent his final months telling me stories, sharing secrets, and preparing me for this moment. What they couldn't have imagined was the manila envelope hidden in my apron pocket, the one containing documents that would shatter their carefully constructed world. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 as I wheeled the cart toward the library. Through the doorway, I could see them gathered like actors in a twisted family drama. There was Vivian, ice-cold and calculating, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her Hermes bag. Beside her sat her younger brother Marcus, sweating despite the autumn chill, his gambling debts written in the desperate gleam of his eyes. Then there was Tabitha, the youngest of Harrison's acknowledged children, who'd married into old money but had burned through it faster than wildfire. She clutched her husband Preston's arm like a lifeline, both of them radiating the quiet desperation of people whose credit cards had been declined one too many times. The irony wasn't lost on me. They all assumed they were entitled to wealth they'd never earned from a man they'd barely known. But what struck me most was their genuine surprise when lawyer Edmund Fitzgerald introduced me not as the help, but as someone with a stake in the proceedings. The confusion in their eyes was almost comical, almost. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Fitzgerald began, his voice carrying the weight of decades in family law, "we're here today for the reading of Harrison Whitmore's last will and testament. Before we begin, I must note that Mr. Whitmore was of sound mind when he made his final revisions just 3 months ago." Vivian's eyebrow arched sharply. "Revisions?" Father never mentioned any changes. The lawyer's smile was professional but pointed. "There's quite a bit Mr. Whitmore never mentioned, I'm afraid. Now, shall we proceed?" As he opened the leather-bound document, I found myself remembering the night Harrison had called me to his study. He'd been sitting in his wheelchair, the oxygen tank humming beside him, his once powerful frame reduced to skin and bone. But his eyes, those sharp blue eyes, had been completely lucid. "Esperanza," he'd said, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago." The memories sent a chill down my spine because that conversation had changed everything. It had revealed a truth so shocking that I'd spent weeks questioning my own sanity. Now, as I watched Mr. Fitzgerald clear his throat and begin reading, I knew that truth was about to detonate like a bomb in the middle of this genteel gathering. I, Harrison Whitmore, being of sound mind and body. The familiar legal language filled the room, but I could see the family members weren't really listening. They were calculating, dividing assets in their heads, planning how to spend money they'd already counted as theirs. What they didn't know was that Harrison had been planning too. For months, he'd been preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, making arrangements, and most importantly, searching for a way to right a wrong that had haunted him for over 2 decades. The manila envelope in my pocket contained just part of that evidence: birth certificates, DNA tests, and photographs that would rewrite the Whitmore family history. Marcus shifted impatiently in his leather chair. Can we skip to the good parts? We all know how this goes: equal shares, trust funds, yada yada. Mr. Fitzgerald's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. I'm afraid it's not quite that simple, Mr. Whitmore. Your father's final will contain some unexpected provisions. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Tabitha's grip on Preston's arm tightened, and I noticed how her wedding ring caught the light, a massive diamond that probably represented their last valuable asset. The desperation was becoming more apparent by the minute, and I found myself wondering what debts, what secrets, what failures had driven each of them to this moment. Vivian leaned forward, her voice sharp as cut glass. What kind of provisions? But before Mr. Fitzgerald could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, and then looked directly at me. Esperanza, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent and related to today's proceedings. The blood drained from my face. Only one person knew about my connection to this family, and I'd specifically asked her to stay away today. If Detective Sarah Chin was here, it could only mean one thing: the investigation had taken a turn none of us had anticipated. As Mr. Fitzgerald stepped out to speak with the detective, the Whitmore family turned their collective gaze on me. For the first time since I'd entered this house 23 years ago, they were really seeing me. Not the invisible help, not the convenient scapegoat, but a woman who clearly knew more than she'd ever let on. What investigation? Vivian's voice was deadly quiet. I met her gaze steadily, my years of silence finally giving way to something stronger: truth. The one into your father's first wife's death. The silence that followed was deafening. Preston actually went pale, while Marcus fumbled for his cigarettes with shaking hands. But it was Tabitha's reaction that surprised me most: relief. As if a secret she'd been carrying had finally been shared. That's impossible, Vivian whispered. Mother died in a car accident when I was 7. There was no investigation. There is now, I said quietly. Because 3 months ago, your father received a letter that changed everything. A letter from someone who witnessed what really happened that night. The grandfather clock chimed the quarter hour, and in that moment, I realized there was no going back. The Whitmore family was about to learn that their carefully maintained facade was built on lies, betrayal, and murder. And somehow, impossibly, I was at the center of it all. Mr. Fitzgerald returned, Detective Chin beside him, and the room's atmosphere shifted from tense to explosive. The detective's presence confirmed what Harrison had suspected in his final months, that his beloved first wife, Margaret, hadn't died in an accident at all. Mrs. Chun needs to speak with all of you, Mr. Fitzgerald announced. It seems there are some questions about the circumstances surrounding Margaret Whitmore's death 25 years ago. Detective Chin stepped forward, her notebook already open. I'm investigating new evidence that suggests Margaret Whitmore's death wasn't accidental. We have a witness who's come forward with information about what happened the night she died. Vivian's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous. What witness? And what does any of this have to do with Father's will? The detective's eyes found mine across the room. The witness is Esperanza Martinez. And according to her statement, she was present in this house the night Margaret Whitmore was murdered. The word murdered hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus dropped his cigarette, Tabitha gasped audibly, and Preston actually stood up as if preparing to flee. But it was Vivian's reaction that chilled me to the bone. She looked directly at me with a mixture of fear and recognition that told me she knew exactly what I'd witnessed all those years ago. That's impossible, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Esperanza would have been just a child then. I was 14, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Old enough to understand what I saw. Old enough to remember. The memory flooded back with crystalline clarity, hiding in the servants' stairway, watching through the crack in the door as Margaret Whitmore confronted someone in the study. The raised voices, the struggle, the sickening sound of her body hitting the marble fireplace. And then the careful staging, the phone call to the police, the The story about the car accident that everyone believed because no one thought to question it. What exactly did you see? Detective Chun asked gently. Before I could answer, Mr. Fitzgerald cleared his throat. Perhaps we should continue with the will reading first. Mr. Whitmore specifically requested that his final wishes be made known before any other matters were addressed. The detective nodded reluctantly, but I could see she was cataloging every expression, every reaction, every tell that might reveal which of the Whitmore children had killed their stepmother 25 years ago. As Mr. Fitzgerald resumed reading, I found myself studying the faces around me with new eyes. One of these people was a murderer. One of them had killed Margaret Whitmore and lived with that secret for decades. And Harrison had known, somehow, he'd figured it out in his final months, which was why he'd changed his will. To my daughter Vivian, the lawyer continued, I leave the sum of $1 and my disappointment in the woman she became. Vivian's sharp intake of breath was audible. That's not possible. I'm his eldest child, his heir. To my son Marcus, I leave $1 and the hope that he'll finally face his demons instead of drowning them. Marcus's face went ashen. The gambling debts, the drinking, the string of failed businesses. Harrison had known about all of it. To my daughter Tabitha, I leave $1 and my regret that I couldn't save you from yourself. Tabitha began to cry, mascara streaming down her cheeks. Whatever secrets she'd been hiding, Harrison had discovered them too. The pattern was becoming clear, and a cold dread settled in my stomach. If Harrison had left everything to me, it wasn't just because I'd cared for him. It was because he'd discovered something that made his biological children unworthy of inheritance, something that connected to Margaret's death and the secrets this family had buried. The remainder of my estate, Mr. Fitzgerald continued, his voice cutting through the shocked silence, including all properties, investments, and personal effects, I leave to my beloved daughter Esperanza Martinez Whitmore. The last name hit the room like a physical blow. Whitmore. He'd called me his daughter, and he'd given me his name. That's impossible. Vivian was on her feet now, her composure completely shattered. She's not his daughter. She's just the help. But even as she said it, I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. The math was adding up, the timeline clicking into place. 23 years ago, when I'd first arrived at this house as a desperate teenager, Harrison had taken one look at me and offered not just a job, but protection. He'd insisted I live in the main house, not the servants' quarters. He'd paid for my education, my medical care, everything, but he'd sworn me to secrecy about our relationship. There's more, Mr. Fitzgerald said quietly. Mr. Whitmore left specific instructions about revealing the truth of Esperanza's parentage. It seems that 24 years ago, he had an affair with a young woman named Carmen Martinez. When Carmen died in childbirth, Harrison arranged for the baby, Esperanza, to be placed with relatives in Mexico. The room was spinning. I gripped the edge of my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. Carmen Martinez, my mother's name. The woman I'd never known, who died giving birth to me. Harrison had been my father all along. When Esperanza came to work here, the lawyer continued, Harrison suspected the truth, but wasn't certain until recently. The DNA test results are included in the will documents. Detective Chun was watching all of this with professional interest, but I could see the gears turning in her mind. If I was Harrison's biological daughter, if I'd witnessed Margaret's murder, if the family had secret motives for wanting me gone, the case was becoming more complex by the minute. Marcus found his voice first. So, what? She gets everything because she's his bastard daughter? What about us? What about his legitimate children? That, said Detective Chun, stepping forward, depends on which of you killed Margaret Whitmore. The accusation hung in the air like a sword. I watched as each of the siblings processed the implication that Harrison had disinherited them not just because of their failures, but because he discovered that one of them was a murderer. Vivian's laugh was sharp and bitter. This is insane. You think one of us killed our own stepmother? Margaret died in a car accident. No, I said quietly, standing up for the first time since the reading began. She didn't. I saw what really happened that night. Every eye in the room fixed on me, and I felt the weight of 25 years of silence pressing down on my shoulders. The truth had been burning inside me for so long that speaking it felt like exhaling poison. I was hiding in the servants' stairway. I began, my voice growing stronger with each word. I heard Margaret arguing with someone in the study. She was angry, saying something about secrets and lies. Then there was a struggle and she fell. But it wasn't an accident. Someone pushed her. Who? Detective Chun asked. Who did you see? Before I could answer, Preston suddenly bolted for the door. His movement was so abrupt, so panicked, that it took everyone by surprise. He made it 3 steps before Detective Chen's partner, who'd been waiting in the hallway, blocked his path. Going somewhere, Mr. Hartford? The detective asked. Tabitha was staring at her husband in horror. Preston? What are you doing? But as I looked at him, really looked at him, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Preston Hartford, who'd married into the family 5 years ago but had been in their social circle much longer. Preston, who'd been at the house the night Margaret died, ostensibly visiting friends. Preston, who'd had access and opportunity, and he was Margaret's lover. I said, the realization hitting me like lightning. That's what the argument was about. She was going to tell Harrison about their affair. Preston's face went white, and in that moment, his guilt was written across his features like a confession. Tabitha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she processed the betrayal, not just that her husband was a murderer, but that he'd been sleeping with her stepmother. Margaret threatened to tell Harrison everything, Preston said, his voice barely above a whisper. She said she was going to leave him and take half his money. She was going to destroy this family. So you destroyed her, Detective Chin said grimly, moving closer to him. It was an accident. We argued. She slapped me. I pushed her away. I never meant for her to hit the fireplace. The confession spilled out of him like water from a broken dam. The cover-up, the staged car accident, the years of living with the secret while married to Margaret's stepdaughter. It was a betrayal so deep, so twisted, that even I felt sick listening to it. Tabitha was sobbing now, her entire world crumbling around her. How could you? How could you marry me knowing what you'd done? But Preston wasn't done. As the detective moved to arrest him, he turned to me with desperate eyes. You don't understand, Harrison knew. These past few months, he figured it out. He was going to expose everything, destroy my family, ruin my children's lives. I couldn't let that happen. A chill ran down my spine. What are you saying? The oxygen tank, he whispered. I adjusted the flow rate. Made it look like his condition was worsening naturally. The room erupted in chaos. Vivian screamed, Marcus cursed, and Tabitha collapsed into her chair as if her strings had been cut. Preston Hartford hadn't just killed Margaret Whitmore 25 years ago. He'd murdered Harrison just 3 months ago to keep his secret safe. As Detective Chun handcuffed Preston and read him his rights, I found myself thinking about the last conversation I'd had with Harrison. He'd known he was dying, but he'd thought it was his illness. He'd never suspected that the man who'd married his youngest daughter was slowly killing him to prevent the truth from coming out. There's something else, Mr. Fitzgerald said quietly as the police led Preston away. Harrison left specific instructions about what to do if his death was found to be unnatural. He handed me another envelope, this one sealed with wax and bearing Harrison's personal stamp. Inside was a letter in his shaky handwriting, dated just 1 week before his death. My dearest Esperanza, it read, if you're reading this, then my suspicions about Preston were correct, and I'm no longer alive to protect you. What you don't know is that Margaret was your biological mother. Carmen Martinez was an alias she used when she had her affair with me. You are not just my daughter. You are Margaret's daughter too, which makes you the rightful heir to the Whitmore fortune in every sense. The letter fell from my numb fingers. Margaret Whitmore, the woman whose murder I'd witnessed as a child, had been my mother. Preston Hartford had killed my mother and then my father, 25 years apart, all to keep his secrets buried. But the revelation raised more questions than it answered. If Margaret was my mother, why had I been told she was Carmen Martinez? Why had I been sent away only to return years later? And most disturbing of all, Did that mean I'd been living in the house where my mother was murdered, working for my father, who didn't know I was his daughter? Detective Chin approached me as the room slowly emptied. Are you all right? This has to be overwhelming. I nodded, though I felt anything but all right. There's something else. Something Harrison told me before he died that I didn't understand then. What? He said Margaret had been planning to leave him, but not because of Preston. He said she discovered something about the family, something that made her afraid for her safety. He thought that's why she was killed, not because of an affair, but because of what she'd learned. The detective's eyes sharpened. What kind of something? Before I could answer, Vivian approached us. Her earlier hysteria had been replaced by a cold, calculating calm that was somehow more frightening. You think you've won, she said to me, but this isn't over. Preston may have killed Margaret, but there are other secrets in this family. Secrets that Harrison never discovered. Secrets that make you just as vulnerable as Margaret was. Her words sent ice through my veins. What secrets? Vivian's smile was sharp as a blade. Ask yourself this, Esperanza. If Margaret was your mother and she was planning to leave Harrison, why didn't she take you with her? What was she running from that was so dangerous she'd abandon her own child? With that, she walked away, leaving me standing in the library surrounded by the wreckage of a family built on lies and murder. I had inherited a fortune, discovered my true parentage, and seen justice served for my parents' deaths. But Vivian's parting words echoed in my mind like a warning. What had Margaret discovered that was worth killing for? And was I now in danger of uncovering the same deadly secret? As I stood there holding Harrison's letter, I realized that the will reading hadn't been an ending at all. It had been the beginning of a much larger mystery. Somewhere in this house, in these family records, in the shadows of the Whitmore legacy, lay a truth so dangerous that people would kill to keep it buried. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, and I was alone in the library where it all began. Tomorrow, I would start searching for answers. Tonight, I would mourn the parents I'd never known I'd lost. But first, I would read the rest of Harrison's letter, because something told me the man who'd spent his final months uncovering family secrets had left me more than just money. He'd left me a map to the truth and a warning about the dangers that lay ahead. The remainder of the letter read, The Whitmore family has been hiding something for over 50 years, something that goes back to my father's generation. Margaret discovered it in the weeks before her death, and I believe that's the real reason she was killed. I've hidden evidence throughout the house, clues that will lead you to the truth if something happens to me. But be careful, my daughter. This secret has already claimed too many lives, and there are people who will stop at nothing to keep it buried. Look for the missing portrait in the gallery, the one that was removed after my father's death. Find out why it was hidden, and you'll find the key to everything. All my love and protection. Your father, Harrison. I folded the letter and looked up at the oil paintings that lined the library walls. Portraits of Whitmore ancestors going back generations, their painted eyes seeming to watch me in the flickering firelight. But even as I studied them, I could see the gaps, spaces where paintings had been removed, stories that had been erased. Tomorrow, I would begin the search for the missing portrait and the secret it represented. Tonight, I would sleep in the house that was now mine, surrounded by the ghosts of a family I was only beginning to understand. But as I climbed the grand staircase to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Whether by painted eyes or living ones, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that inheriting the Whitmore fortune had made me the keeper of their darkest secrets, and possibly the next target of whoever was determined to keep them buried. The last will and testament had been read, justice had been served, and the truth about my parents' deaths had finally come to light. But in the shadows of the Whitmore mansion, older and more dangerous secrets were stirring, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to uncover them. As I closed my bedroom door and turned the lock, I wondered if I would live long enough to solve the mystery Harrison had left for me. Or if, like my mother before me, I would become another casualty in a war I was only beginning to understand. The Whitmore legacy was mine now, for better or worse. And tomorrow, the real investigation would begin. The missing portrait. The oil painting crashed to the floor with a sound like thunder, its gilded frame splintering as the canvas revealed what had been hidden behind it for 50 years, a photograph of my grandfather with a woman who looked exactly like me, and a child who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. But it was the writing on the back that made my blood freeze. Eleanor Whitmore and daughter Catalina, 1973. The ones we lost. 2 weeks after the will reading, I'd been living in the Whitmore mansion for 14 days, and every night I heard footsteps in the walls. Not metaphorical ghosts of the past, but actual footsteps, soft, deliberate, moving through passages I was beginning to suspect existed behind the paneled walls of this sprawling estate. Tonight, I was finally going to find out who was walking through my house in the darkness. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed midnight as I crept down the main staircase, my bare feet silent on the Persian runner. In my hand, I clutched the ornate letter opener I'd taken from Harrison's desk. Not much of a weapon, but it made me feel less vulnerable as I moved through shadows thick enough to hide secrets. The portrait gallery stretched before me like a corridor of judgment, generations of Whitmores staring down from their gilded frames. But it was the empty spaces that drew my attention, rectangular patches of wallpaper slightly darker than the rest, marking where paintings had once hung. According to Harrison's letter, one of these missing portraits held the key to a family secret worth killing for. I'd spent 2 weeks searching during daylight hours, going through Harrison's papers, exploring rooms that had been locked for decades, trying to piece together the puzzle he'd left for me. What I discovered was a family history riddled with gaps, inconsistencies, and carefully omitted details that suggested the Whitmores had been hiding far more than just Preston's crimes. A soft scraping sound from behind the wall made me freeze. There, the footsteps again, but this time I could pinpoint their location. They were coming from somewhere behind the portrait of Harrison's father, Nathaniel Whitmore, whose stern face had always made me uncomfortable during my years as a servant in this house. I approached the massive painting slowly, running my hands along its ornate frame until I found what I was looking for, a section that moved slightly under pressure. With a soft click, part of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passageway that disappeared into darkness. The secret passages I'd suspected were real, and someone had been using them. But as I stepped into the cramped space, flashlight in hand, I realized I wasn't alone in my investigation. Fresh footprints in the dust led deeper into the passage, and they were small enough to belong to a woman. The passage wound through the walls of the mansion like arteries through a body, connecting rooms, providing hidden access to private conversations and secret meetings. How many family secrets had been overheard through these walls? How many conspiracies had been planned in these shadows? I followed the footprints for what felt like miles, but was probably only minutes, until they led to a small chamber I hadn't known existed. And there, surrounded by stacks of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be decades of carefully collected evidence, sat a woman I'd never seen before. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair and eyes the same shade of blue as Harrison's had been. When she looked up at me, her expression showed no surprise, as if she'd been expecting me to find her eventually. "You must be Esperanza," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. "I've been waiting for you to discover this room." My grip tightened on the letter opener.
Who are you?
"What are you doing in my house?" Her smile was sad and knowing. "Your house? Oh, my dear girl, this house belongs to all of us. I'm Elena Whitmore, Harrison's sister, the one who supposedly died in a mental institution 40 years ago." The revelation hit me like cold water. Harrison had a sister? In all my years in this house, in all the family stories and genealogies I'd studied, there had never been any mention of a sister. She'd been completely erased from the family history. "That's impossible," I said, but even as I spoke, I could see the family resemblance. The bone structure, the eyes, the way she held her head. She was definitely a Whitmore. "Nothing's impossible in this family," Elena said, gesturing to the documents around her. "Only carefully hidden. I've been living in these passages for 3 years, ever since I learned that Harrison was still alive and that the family had covered up my existence." She stood slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. You see, dear, I was supposed to die in that institution. The family arranged it, made sure I was declared dead, buried in an empty coffin, and then forgot I ever existed. But I survived, and I've spent the last 40 years gathering evidence of what this family really is. My head was spinning. What evidence? What are you talking about? Elena moved to a wall covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and what looked like medical records. The Whitmore family has been systematically eliminating inconvenient relatives for over 50 years. Anyone who threatened to expose their secrets, anyone who didn't fit their image, anyone who simply knew too much, they found ways to make them disappear. She pointed to a photograph of a young woman holding a baby. This is Eleanor Whitmore, our cousin, who died in a convenient car accident in 1973 when she threatened to expose Nathaniel's illegal business dealings. The baby disappeared that same night, supposedly died with her mother, but the body was never found. The photograph looked familiar, but I couldn't place where I'd seen it before. What happened to the child? That, Elena said, is what I've been trying to discover. Because I believe that child survived, just like I did. And I believe she's been right here in this house all along. A chill ran down my spine as the implications began to sink in. You think I'm that child. You think I'm Eleanor's daughter. I think you're the missing piece of a puzzle that's been decades in the making, Elena said. But we're not alone in trying to solve it. Someone else has been searching for the truth. Someone who's been watching this family for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. As if summoned by her words, a new voice spoke from the entrance to the chamber. How touching. A family reunion. We both turned to see Vivian standing in the doorway, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man I didn't recognize, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of cold eyes that suggested violence was always an option. Hello, Annalena, Vivian said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Still playing detective in the walls, I see. Elena stepped protectively in front of me. Vivian, I should have known you'd find us eventually. Oh, I've known about your little hidey hole for months, Vivian replied. Just like I've known about our dear Esperanza's true identity. What I didn't know was how much you'd figured out. The man behind her moved closer, and I could see the bulge of a weapon under his jacket. This wasn't a family confrontation, it was a trap. The question is, Vivian continued, how much of our conversation did you overhear before you decided to join us? Elena's face went pale. You were listening to us. The whole house is wired for sound, dear aunt. Has been for years. We've heard every word you've spoken, every phone call you've made, every plan you've hatched. Did you really think you could hide in the walls of a house owned by people with unlimited resources? I was beginning to understand the true scope of what I'd inherited. Not just money and property, but a legacy of surveillance, control, and systematic elimination of threats to the family's power. What do you want? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Vivian's smile was razor-sharp. The same thing our family has always wanted, to protect our secrets at any cost. You and Elena represent loose ends that need to be tied up. The man behind her took another step forward, and I realized we were trapped in a room with only one exit, facing people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their interests. But Elena wasn't finished. Tell her about the other children, Vivian. Tell her about the ones who came before her. What other children? I demanded. Vivian's composure slipped for just a moment. Elena's delusional. The institution damaged her mind. I was never in an institution, Elena said fiercely. I was hidden away because I discovered what happened to Eleanor's daughter and to the other children who threatened to expose this family's crimes. She grabbed a file from one of her stacks and thrust it toward me. There have been at least 6 children over the years who were supposedly killed or died of natural causes, but whose bodies were never found. The Whitmore family has been harvesting heirs, Esperanza, taking children with legitimate claims to the fortune and either eliminating them or controlling them. The file contained birth certificates, death certificates, and newspaper clippings spanning decades. Each told the story of a child with Whitmore blood who had died under suspicious circumstances. But what caught my attention was the pattern. They had all died or disappeared when they were old enough to make legal claims to the family fortune. You're one of them, Elena continued. But instead of killing you, they decided to use you. They brought you here as a servant, kept you close so they could control you, and made sure you never learned your true identity until it was too late. Too late for what? I asked. Vivian laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. Too late to escape, of course. Did you really think inheriting this fortune came without strings attached? You're not just an heiress, Esperanza. You're a prisoner. And now that you know too much, you're also a liability. The man behind her moved his hand inside his jacket, and I knew our time was running out. But Elena had one more card to play. The missing portrait, she said suddenly. You haven't found it yet, have you? Vivian's eyes narrowed. What about it? It's not missing, Elena said. It's hidden, and it contains evidence that will destroy this family once and for all. I could see the uncertainty in Vivian's face. Whatever Elena was talking about, it was something Vivian hadn't anticipated. You see, Elena continued, Nathaniel Whitmore didn't just eliminate inconvenient relatives. He documented everything. Photos, videos, records of every crime, every cover-up, every murder. He kept it all as insurance, thinking it would protect him from betrayal within the family. Where is it? Vivian demanded. Elena smiled. Hidden in plain sight. Behind the portrait that was never removed, the one everyone assumed was just another family painting. I thought about the gallery, about the portraits I'd studied night after night. Which one could be hiding such devastating evidence? The portrait of Nathaniel himself, Elena said, as if reading my thoughts. The one hanging right above where you found the secret passage. The evidence isn't behind a missing painting, it's behind the painting everyone ignores because it's always been there. Vivian's face went white. That's impossible. We searched that painting years ago. You searched the frame, Elena corrected. But Nathaniel was cleverer than that. The evidence is in the paint itself, photographs and documents sealed behind a false layer of canvas. All you have to do is remove the outer painting to reveal what's hidden underneath. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Decades of crimes, documented and preserved by the very man who had committed them, hidden in a portrait that had been staring down at the family for 50 years. Vivian recovered first. It doesn't matter. Even if that evidence exists, no one will ever see it. Marcus, take care of them. The man, Marcus, apparently, drew his weapon, but Elena was already moving. With surprising agility for her age, she dove toward a section of the wall that swung open to reveal another passage. Run, she shouted to me. I didn't need to be told twice. As gunshots echoed behind us, I followed Elena into the narrow passage, my heart pounding as we scrambled through the darkness. Behind us, I could hear Vivian shouting orders and footsteps giving chase. Where does this lead? I gasped as we ran. To the gallery, Elena replied. We have to get to that portrait before they do. The passage twisted and turned, emerging finally behind a bookshelf in the library. We burst through into the main house, racing toward the portrait gallery as shouts echoed from the passages behind us. But when we reached the gallery, Nathaniel's portrait was gone. In its place was an empty frame and strips of canvas scattered on the floor. Someone had beaten us to it. No, Elena whispered. We're too late. Actually, said a familiar voice from the shadows, you're right on time. Detective Sarachin stepped into the light, holding what appeared to be a rolled canvas and a small digital camera. I've been photographing the evidence hidden in this painting for the past hour. Thanks for leading me to it. I stared at her in confusion. How long have you been here? Long enough to hear everything, she replied. The house may be wired for Vivian's surveillance, but the police have been conducting their own investigation into the Whitmore family for months. We've been watching, listening, and gathering evidence of our own. The sound of approaching footsteps made us all turn toward the entrance to the gallery. Vivian appeared, no longer the composed socialite, but a desperate woman facing the collapse of everything she'd worked to protect. Give me the evidence, she demanded, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Detective Chin smiled. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. Vivian Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to multiple homicides, and about a dozen other charges that are going to keep you locked up for the rest of your life. As the detective read Vivian her rights and backup officers arrived to take her into custody, I found myself looking at Elena with new respect. "How long have you been planning this?" 3 years, she replied. "Ever since I learned that Harrison was still alive and that Preston had killed Margaret. I knew the only way to stop this family's cycle of violence was to expose everything at once. All the crimes, all the cover-ups, all the secrets they'd spent decades protecting. But why involve me? Why not just go to the police yourself?" Elena's expression grew sad. "Because I needed someone with a legitimate claim to the Whitmore fortune, someone who could inherit everything and then use that power to make sure justice was served. Harrison's will wasn't just about giving you money, Esperanza. It was about giving you the power to end this family's reign of terror." As the police led Vivian away, I realized that the inheritance I'd received came with more responsibility than I'd ever imagined. I wasn't just the heir to a fortune, I was the guardian of justice for all the victims this family had claimed over the decades. But there was still one mystery unsolved. "Elena," I said, "what happened to Eleanor's daughter? The child from the photograph?" Elena looked at me for a long moment, then pulled out a birth certificate I hadn't seen before. The name on it made my blood freeze. Catalina Eleanor Whitmore, born 1973, parents listed as Eleanor Whitmore and Harrison Whitmore. "Wait," I said, studying the document. "This says Harrison was the father. But that would make this child his daughter, not just his cousin's child." "Eleanor was having an affair with Harrison," Elena explained. "She was going to expose not just Nathaniel's crimes, but Harrison's betrayal of his wife. That's why she had to die and why her daughter had to disappear." I looked at the birth certificate again, then at Elena. "What happened to Catalina?" Elena smiled sadly. "She was renamed and placed with a family in Mexico. Her new identity was Carmen Martinez's daughter, a young woman who died in childbirth, leaving behind a baby who would grow up never knowing her true heritage." The truth hit me like a physical blow. "I'm Catalina. I'm Eleanor's daughter." "You're Harrison's daughter too," Elena said gently. "Which makes you not just an heir to the Whitmore fortune, but the rightful owner of everything this family has built over generations." Detective Chin approached us, her expression serious. "There's something else you need to know. The evidence in Nathaniel's portrait doesn't just document historical crimes. It includes records of ongoing criminal activities, money laundering, tax evasion, political corruption. The Whitmore family has been operating as a criminal organization for decades." I looked around the gallery, at the portraits of ancestors who had seemed so respectable, so distinguished. How many of them had been criminals? How many had blood on their hands? "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Detective Chin said, "we prosecute everyone who's still alive and complicit in these crimes. And you decide what to do with a fortune that was built on a foundation of murder and corruption." As the police finished their work and the mansion fell quiet, I found myself alone with Elena in the gallery where it all began. The empty frame where Nathaniel's portrait had hung seemed to mock us, a hole in the family history that could never be filled. "There's something else," Elena said quietly. "Something I haven't told you yet." I was beginning to dread her revelations. "What now?" "You're not the only surviving heir. There's one more child who escaped the family's attention, one more person with a legitimate claim to everything you've inherited." She handed me another file, this one containing recent photographs and surveillance reports. The subject was a young man about my age, working as a teacher in a small town outside the city. "His name is Gabriel," Elena said. "He's Marcus's son, the child Marcus thought died in infancy. But like you, he was hidden away, given a new identity, and raised by people who had no idea of his true heritage." I studied the photographs, seeing familiar features in an unfamiliar face. "Does he know?" "Not yet. But he will soon. Because Marcus is going to prison, and when he does, he'll try to use Gabriel as his insurance policy, a way to maintain control of the family fortune from behind bars." The implications were staggering. Just when I thought I understood the scope of the Whitmore family's crimes, another layer of complexity revealed itself. How many other hidden heirs were out there? How many other secrets remained buried? "What do you think I should do?" I asked Elena. What Harrison would have wanted you to do, she replied. Use the power you've inherited to break the cycle. Find Gabriel before Marcus does. Protect him the way no one protected you or Eleanor or any of the other victims. As dawn broke over the Whitmore mansion, I realized that inheriting this fortune had been just the beginning of my journey. The real work, finding the other survivors, bringing justice to the victims, and deciding what to do with a legacy built on corruption, was still ahead of me. But I wasn't alone anymore. Elena had survived 40 years in hiding to help me uncover the truth. Detective Chen and her team were working to ensure that justice was finally served. And somewhere out there, Gabriel was living his life unaware that he was about to become part of a story that had been decades in the making. The missing portrait had been found, its secrets finally exposed. But the Whitmore family saga was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning, and this time, the survivors would be the ones writing the ending. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I made a mental note to call Detective Chen in the morning. We had a teacher to find, a family to protect, and a fortune to redirect toward justice instead of crime. The footsteps in the walls had been silenced, but the echoes of the past would linger until every secret was exposed and every victim was remembered. That was my responsibility now, not just as an heiress, but as a survivor who had finally learned the truth about where she came from. And truth, I was beginning to understand, was the most powerful inheritance of all. The final heir. Gabriel Martinez stood in my doorway holding a gun, his teacher's gentle demeanor replaced by something cold and desperate, and I realized that everything Elena had told me about protecting the innocent heir had been a lie. He'd been hunting me long before I'd ever thought to find him. "Hello, sister," he said, the word dripping with 25 years of carefully cultivated hatred. "It's time we talked about what you stole from me." 1 month after the portrait revelation, the morning Gabriel arrived in my life, I was sitting in Harrison's old study, surrounded by legal documents and photographs of family members I was still learning to identify. Detective Chen had been right about the scope of the Whitmore criminal enterprise. Every day brought new revelations about decades of corruption, and every revelation brought new questions about how deep the conspiracy really went. Elena had moved into one of the guest bedrooms, officially emerging from her 40 years of hiding to help me navigate the complexities of dismantling a criminal legacy. We'd spent weeks cataloging evidence, identifying victims, and working with law enforcement to ensure that justice was finally served. What we hadn't expected was that our efforts to locate Gabriel would attract the attention of someone else who'd been searching for him. The first sign of trouble was the black sedan that had been parked across from the estate for 3 days. Elena noticed it first, her years of paranoid vigilance serving us well. The second sign was the break-in at the lawyer's office, where we'd stored some of the more sensitive documents. Nothing was taken, but someone had clearly been searching for information about Gabriel's whereabouts. "We need to find him before they do," Elena had said, pacing the study like a caged animal. "If Marcus's associates get to him first." She didn't need to finish the thought. We both knew what happened to inconvenient heirs in the Whitmore family. But when Gabriel finally appeared, it wasn't as the innocent victim we'd expected to rescue. It was as something far more dangerous, a man who'd spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment. "You can put the gun down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I faced my newly discovered half-brother. "I'm not your enemy." Gabriel's laugh was bitter. "Not my enemy? You inherited everything that should have been mine. You're living in the house where my mother was murdered. You're wearing jewelry that belonged to my grandmother. And you think we're not enemies?" His mother. The pieces began clicking into place, with sickening clarity. Gabriel wasn't Marcus's son at all. He was Eleanor's son, which meant he was my full brother, not my half-brother. But if that was true, then everything Elena had told me about his identity was wrong. "Eleanor was your mother too," I said carefully. "Eleanor Whitmore Martinez," he corrected. "The woman who spent her last months writing letters to the son she'd been forced to give up. The woman who died trying to expose the truth about what this family had done to us." He reached into his jacket with his free hand and pulled out a bundle of letters, yellowed with age. "She wrote to me every week for 2 years before they killed her. Told me about the Whitmore fortune that was rightfully ours, about the crimes they'd committed, about the sister I had somewhere who'd been stolen, just like I had. My heart pounded as I processed what he was telling me. You've known about me all along. I've been tracking this family for 15 years, Gabriel said. Ever since I found Eleanor's letters in my adoptive mother's belongings. Do you know what it's like to grow up thinking you're an orphan, only to discover that your real family is one of the most powerful in the country and that they tried to have you killed? The gun in his hand remained steady, but I could see the pain behind his anger. Whatever had shaped him into this moment, it had been forged in the same fire of abandonment and betrayal that had defined my own life. I know exactly what that's like, I said quietly. But pointing a gun at me isn't going to bring Eleanor back or undo what was done to us. Maybe not, Gabriel replied. But it's going to ensure that justice is finally served. Starting with you returning what you stole. I didn't steal anything. I didn't even know who I really was until a month ago. Gabriel's eyes narrowed. Don't lie to me. You've been working for this family for decades. You were their inside agent, their way of keeping tabs on anyone who might threaten their secrets. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. That's not true. I was as much a victim as you were. Were you? Gabriel took a step closer, and I could see the intelligence behind his anger. This wasn't just rage, it was calculated confrontation. Then explain why you were conveniently positioned to inherit everything when Harrison died. Explain why you're the only heir who wasn't eliminated or hidden away. Explain why the family that murdered our mother decided to make you their heiress. I opened my mouth to protest, then stopped. Because when he put it that way, my survival did seem suspiciously convenient. Why had I been allowed to live and work in the house where Eleanor was murdered? Why had Harrison taken me in, protected me, but never told me who I really was? Why had I been kept so close to the family that had destroyed my biological parents? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm trying to find out. I already found out, Gabriel said. That's why I'm here. He gestured with the gun toward the desk where I'd been working. Sit down. There are things you need to see. Against my better judgment, I sat. Gabriel moved to the window, keeping the gun trained on me while maintaining a view of the driveway. Whatever he was planning, he'd thought it through carefully. Elena's been lying to you, he said without preamble. She's not Harrison's sister who escaped from a mental institution. She's Eleanor's sister, who's been working with the family for 25 years. The words hit me like ice water. That's impossible. Is it? Think about it, Esperanza, or should I call you Catalina? How convenient that Elena appeared just when you needed someone to guide you through uncovering the family secrets. How convenient that she knew exactly where to find evidence that had been hidden for decades. How convenient that she led you to discover the truth about the missing portrait at exactly the right moment. I thought about Elena's sudden appearance in the secret passages, her encyclopedic knowledge of family crimes, her perfect timing in helping me navigate the aftermath of Harrison's death. What had seemed like miraculous luck was beginning to look like careful orchestration. Elena's been the family's cleanup specialist for decades, Gabriel continued. Her job was to identify threats to the Whitmore legacy and neutralize them. She's the one who arranged for most of the convenient accidents that eliminated inconvenient heirs. My mind raced back through every interaction I'd had with Elena. Her knowledge of the secret passages, her familiarity with family documents, her ability to appear and disappear without detection. It all made sense if she'd been working for the family rather than against them. But she helped expose Vivian. I protested. She helped bring down Preston. She helped eliminate the family members who were becoming liabilities, Gabriel corrected. Preston was getting sloppy, taking risks that could have exposed the entire operation. Vivian was losing control, making emotional decisions instead of calculated ones. Elena didn't help you bring them to justice. She helped the family cut its losses. The room seemed to spin around me. If Gabriel was right, then everything I thought I knew about the past month was a lie. I hadn't inherited a fortune and used it to seek justice. I'd been manipulated into cleaning house for a criminal organization. Where is Elena now? I asked. Gabriel smiled grimly.
Gone.
disappeared sometime during the night, along with several important documents and about $2 million in bearer bonds. She completed her mission and moved on to the next job. I felt sick. What mission? Making sure the Whitmore criminal enterprise survived the exposure of its most visible crimes. Think about it, with Preston, Vivian, and Marcus in prison, who's left to run the family business? Who's left with access to the accounts, the properties, the networks of corruption that generate billions of dollars annually? The answer was obvious, and it terrified me. Me. You, Gabriel confirmed. The perfect puppet. Someone with legitimate legal claim to everything. Someone who believes she's seeking justice. Someone who can be guided and manipulated by advisors who seem to have her best interests at heart. I stood up abruptly, anger overriding fear. I would never participate in criminal activities. I'd rather give everything away than continue what this family started. Would you? Gabriel asked. Even if it meant destroying the lives of thousands of innocent people who depend on Whitmore Enterprises for their livelihoods? Even if it meant exposing government officials and business leaders who've been cooperating with the family for decades? Even if it meant triggering an economic collapse that would devastate entire communities? The questions hit like hammer blows. I'd been so focused on justice for the family's victims that I hadn't considered the broader implications of dismantling their empire. The Whitmore fortune isn't just money, Gabriel continued. It's a web of relationships, dependencies, and mutual obligations that touches every level of society. You can't simply walk away from it without causing massive collateral damage. So, what are you suggesting? That I become a criminal to protect other criminals. I'm suggesting that you recognize reality, Gabriel said. This family built something that's too big to destroy and too important to abandon. The question isn't whether the Whitmore legacy will continue, it's who will control it. The gun in his hand no longer seemed like a threat. It seemed like a prop in a larger performance. You want to control it. I want to reform it, Gabriel corrected. I've spent 15 years studying this family's operations, learning how they work, identifying ways to redirect their power toward legitimate purposes. I don't want to destroy the Whitmore empire. I want to transform it. For the first time since he'd appeared in my doorway, his proposal made sense. If the criminal network was too entrenched to eliminate, perhaps the only solution was to change its purpose while maintaining its structure. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Gabriel lowered the gun slightly. Partnership. You have the legal authority to control the Whitmore assets. I have the knowledge and planning to redirect them toward legitimate goals. Together, we can turn a criminal enterprise into a force for positive change. And if I refuse? His expression hardened. Then you'll suffer the same fate as every other Whitmore heir who refused to cooperate with the family's interests. Elena may be gone, but she's not the only cleanup specialist the family employs. The threat was clear, but so was the opportunity. If Gabriel was telling the truth about the scope of the Whitmore empire, then I faced a choice between transformation and destruction, both of the empire and of myself. How do I know you're telling the truth? I asked. How do I know this isn't just another manipulation? Gabriel reached into his pocket and pulled out a smartphone. Because I have proof of everything I've told you, including recordings of Elena's real conversations with family associates, financial records showing where the missing money went, and surveillance footage of her meeting with people who definitely aren't law enforcement. He activated the phone, and Elena's voice filled the room. The situation is contained. Esperanza believes she's uncovered family secrets, but she's only seen what we wanted her to see. The real assets remain protected, and the transition of control is proceeding as planned. My blood ran cold as I listened to Elena discussing my management with clinical detachment. Gabriel had been right. I'd been played from the moment she appeared in those secret passages. There's more, Gabriel said, scrolling through files on his phone. Bank records showing regular payments to Elena from Whitmore family accounts going back 20 years. Communication logs proving she's been reporting on your activities to someone calling himself the trustee. And video footage of her removing documents from this house that you probably don't even know are missing. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of my trust. Elena hadn't saved me. She'd been managing me like any other family asset. Who is the trustee? I asked. Gabriel's expression grew grim. That's the biggest secret of all. The Whitmore family hasn't been run by the visible heirs for decades. There's someone else. Someone who's been pulling the strings from behind the scenes, making the real decisions while people like Harrison and Vivian played their public roles. Do you know who it is? I have suspicions, Gabriel said. But suspicions aren't proof, and without proof, we're both just as expendable as Eleanor was. A new sound outside made us both freeze. Car doors slamming, multiple vehicles, the organized movement of people who weren't here for a social visit. Gabriel moved to the window and cursed under his breath. We're out of time, he said. Elena must have reported that I made contact with you. They're here to tie up loose ends. Who's here? The cleanup crew. The people who handle problems that can't be solved with money or influence. Gabriel pocketed his phone and checked his gun, his teacher's demeanor completely replaced by someone who'd clearly prepared for violence. We have maybe 2 minutes before they surround the house. After that, our only value to them will be as examples to future heirs who might consider going off script. The sound of breaking glass from the ground floor confirmed his assessment. We were under attack, and whoever was coming for us wasn't interested in negotiation. There's a passage behind the bookshelf, I said, remembering Elena's escape route from the night before. It leads to the wine cellar. They'll know about the passages, Gabriel replied. Elena would have given them complete layouts of the house. Then what do you suggest? Gabriel smiled grimly. We fight back. But first, we need to get something from Harrison's safe. What's safe? The one behind the portrait of his mother in the master bedroom. The one Elena didn't know about because Harrison installed it after her last intelligence update. We could hear footsteps on the main staircase now, moving with military precision. Gabriel grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the study's back exit, the gun ready in his other hand. What's in the safe? I whispered as we crept down the hallway. The real Whitmore family records, Gabriel replied. The ones that identify the trustee and document every crime, every victim, every secret that's been buried for 50 years. Harrison may have been manipulated by Elena, but he wasn't stupid. He kept his insurance policy separate from everything else. We reached the master bedroom just as the study door exploded inward behind us. Gabriel went straight to the portrait of Harrison's mother while I barricaded the bedroom door with a heavy dresser. The combination? He asked. I thought frantically. Harrison had been sentimental about family, even the family that had betrayed him. Try Eleanor's birthday, March 15th, 1973. The safe clicked open, revealing stacks of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be several digital storage devices. Gabriel grabbed everything, stuffing it into a messenger bag he'd apparently brought for this purpose. Got it, he said. Now we need to get out of here before. The bedroom door shuddered under heavy impact. Our barricade wouldn't hold much longer. Gabriel moved to the window and looked down at the grounds below. There's a ledge that runs along the second floor. If we can reach the east wing, there's a fire escape that Elena wouldn't know about. If we can reach it, I repeated. What if we can't? Then we die knowing the truth instead of living as puppets, Gabriel said simply. The bedroom door splintered, and armed figures in tactical gear began forcing their way through the gap. Gabriel helped me out onto the ledge, then followed, closing the window behind us just as the first shots were fired. The ledge was narrow, slippery with morning dew, and terrifyingly high above the stone courtyard below. But as we inched along the side of the mansion, I realized that this was the first time since inheriting the Whitmore fortune that I felt truly free. Whatever happened next, I was finally making my own choices instead of following someone else's script. We reached the fire escape just as figures appeared at the bedroom window behind us. Gabriel's messenger bag caught on the railing as we descended, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought we'd lose Harrison's evidence to the courtyard below. But he managed to free it, and we dropped to the ground running. The garage, Gabriel panted as we sprinted across the grounds. I have a car waiting. Behind us, the mansion that had been my home for 23 years was swarming with armed figures. Whatever the Whitmore family's cleanup crew was, they weren't taking any chances with loose ends. Gabriel's car was a nondescript sedan that looked like it belonged to the teacher he'd been pretending to be. As we drove away from the estate, I found myself looking back at the imposing structure that had defined my life for so long. Any regrets? Gabriel asked, noticing my backward glance. Just one, I replied. I wish I'd known the truth sooner. The truth is what we make of it now, Gabriel said. The question is whether we use Harrison's evidence to expose the trustee or whether we become the trustee ourselves. It was a question that would define not just our future, but the future of everyone touched by the Whitmore legacy. As we drove toward an uncertain destiny, I realized that the story that had begun with the will reading was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. 6 months later, the congressional hearing room was packed with reporters, family members of victims, and government officials who'd spent decades looking the other way while the Whitmore empire operated with impunity. I sat at the witness table, facing a panel of senators who would decide whether the evidence Gabriel and I had assembled was sufficient to bring down one of the most powerful criminal networks in the country. The trustee's identity had been the biggest shock of all. Senator William Ashford, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, the man who'd been investigating government corruption for 20 years, had been the secret head of the Whitmore criminal enterprise the entire time. His crusade against organized crime had been a perfect cover for eliminating his competition while protecting his own interests. Ms. Martinez, the committee's ranking member, began, "You're asking us to believe that a sitting U.S. senator has been running a criminal organization for decades. That's an extraordinary claim requiring extraordinary evidence." I looked at Gabriel, sitting in the gallery behind me, and drew strength from his steady gaze. We'd spent 6 months preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, protecting witnesses, and staying one step ahead of cleanup crews who seemed determined to bury the truth along with anyone who tried to expose it. "Senator," I replied, "I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm asking you to examine the evidence and draw your own conclusions." The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing payments from Whitmore accounts to Ashford's various shell companies. Recorded conversations between Ashford and Elena discussing the elimination of inconvenient family members. Video footage of Ashford meeting with known criminals and corrupt officials. And most damning of all, Harrison's personal recordings of conversations with the trustee dating back 15 years. As the hearing progressed, I watched Senator Ashford's carefully constructed facade begin to crumble. The man who'd built his career on fighting corruption was revealed as the architect of one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in modern history. But the hearing was about more than just exposing Ashford. It was about transforming the Whitmore legacy from a tool of oppression into an instrument of justice. Gabriel and I had spent months developing a plan to convert the family's vast resources into a foundation dedicated to helping victims of organized crime and corruption. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were using the Whitmore fortune to undo the damage the Whitmore family had caused. When my testimony was complete, I stepped down from the witness table and joined Gabriel in the gallery. Around us, the hearing continued, but I knew the outcome was no longer in doubt. The evidence was too comprehensive, the corruption too extensive, the truth too devastating to ignore. "Any regrets?" Gabriel asked, echoing his question from 6 months earlier. I thought about Elena, who disappeared completely after our escape from the mansion. I thought about the cleanup crew members who'd been arrested in raids across the country. I thought about Vivian, Preston, and Marcus, serving their sentences while their empire crumbled around them. "Just one," I said. "I wish Eleanor could have seen this." Gabriel smiled. "I think she can. And I think she's proud of what we've accomplished." As we left the hearing room, reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed, but I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since this whole journey began. The Whitmore family saga was finally ending, not with more violence and cover-ups, but with accountability and justice. The fortune I'd inherited was being transformed into something Eleanor would have approved of. The crimes that had defined my family for generations were being exposed and prosecuted. And the cycle of violence that had claimed so many victims was finally being broken. But as Gabriel and I walked down the courthouse steps, a familiar figure stepped out of the crowd. Elena, looking older and more tired than I remembered, but very much alive. "Hello, Esperanza," she said quietly. "We need to talk." My blood ran cold. Elena's appearance could only mean one thing. The story I thought was ending was actually entering a new chapter. There's something you need to know about Senator Ashford, she continued. Something that changes everything you think you've accomplished here today. Gabriel's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon, but Elena held up her hands in a gesture of peace. I'm not here to threaten you, she said. I'm here to warn you. Because Ashford wasn't the trustee, he was just another puppet. The real power behind the Whitmore Empire is still out there, and they're not going to let you destroy decades of work without a fight. As Elena's words sank in, I realized that our victory in the courthouse had been just another battle in a war that was far from over. The Whitmore family legacy would continue to cast shadows across our lives until the true puppet master was finally exposed. But this time, Gabriel and I would be ready. We'd learned from our mistakes, understood the scope of our enemies, and built networks of allies who shared our commitment to justice. The final heir of the Whitmore fortune would not be defined by the crimes of the past, but by the choices made in pursuit of a better future. And whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, as brother and sister, as partners in justice, and as the generation that finally broke the cycle of corruption that had defined our family for too long. The courthouse steps stretched out below us, leading toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in my life, uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. The Whitmore saga would continue, but it would be written by survivors rather than victims. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful inheritance of all.